Good evening and welcome to our weekly the Guyana Dialogue program, sponsored by a group of Guyanese resident in the United States, Canada, the UK, the Caribbean, and in Guyana. Today, we have our special guest, Indian rights activist, social commentator, lawyer, sociologist, Mr. Ravi as our guest, and we have invited him to speak on the job situation, the employment situation in Ghana, as well as poverty. These are two areas that are linked, intricately linked with one another. And there has been much debate and discussion about whether, in spite of all the development, whether the unemployment rate has dropped significantly, as well as the level of poverty. Um, Before we proceed to ask Mr. Dave some questions, I'll invite him first to make some comments on the current visit of Secretary of State Marco Rubio to Guyana, especially in relation to his pronouncement on the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy. So, Mr. Dave, can you please address that, if you may?
Well, Secretary of State Marco Rubio's visit, I think, is going to go down as a historical one. It marks a seismic shift, I believe, in our relations in the region vis-a-vis Venezuela. The government of Dr. Irfan Ali has gone out of his way to use diplomacy initiated by members of CARICOM, notably Ralph Gonzalez, and he met with Maduro against a lot of advice. Many people told him that basically Maduro was just grandstanding and Maduro was simply perpetuating their insistence, Venezuela's insistence, that this matter of the controversy can only be resolved through direct negotiations, when in fact the Geneva Agreement, which governs the controversy, specifies the ICJ as one of the routes, and we went that route. Be as it may, President Ali met Maduro, but lo and behold, as soon as he met, as soon as they committed themselves to create a zone of peace, Maduro went on a rampage, so to speak, making all kinds of provocative acts, ranging from a few days after the Argyle agreement between him and President Ali of massing his troops off our coast to, on March 1st, sending a gunship from the Venezuelan Navy to confront the Exxon FPSO in our exclusive economic zone. That in any way, shape, or form was tantamount to an act of war in our estimation. Modern war is not necessarily ballistic, where you're shooting bullets. It consists of using all kinds of acts of intimidation, of cyber warfare, and all other intrusions like that to make the point. The United States came out and made a very, very strong statement that this will not stand. This kind of behavior will not stand. And Secretary of State Rubio's visit today to Guyana, in that visit, he has reiterated that in the very strongest language. The point is that in this hemisphere, the United States has always defined it as a special zone, not necessarily only because it's in its backyard, but for its own strategic reasons. It has to take this area very seriously as a kind of weak underbelly to the continental United States. So to come back to it, Mr. Rubio came, he spoke, and he, I would like to believe, has confirmed what some of us have asked for there to be a closer relationship with the United States of America and Guyana in terms of protecting us from this, uh, I don't know, man on horseback on our western border who insist on taking over our Essequibo.
Do you have any idea why the previous administration didn't take a similar stand towards Guyana, on the Guyana?
Well, there is always differences in approach by various administrations, and we can look at their worldview. It would come out of their worldview. Mr. Biden's worldview apparently was one of what I would call appeasement in so many flashpoints across the world. And he was going by a paradigm that we now see has shifted because the premises of the Biden's foreign policy strategies um, really has been the world has outgrown those premises, and those premises was that the America will have to be looking after the entire world, whereas the new administration is looking after its America's direct interest. And in this hemisphere, I think America will play a much stronger role than Biden, where I think definitely the United States was spread too thin. And we now see that there is now not a retreat, but a withdrawal from all the responsibilities that it undertook in Europe. And Mr. Trump has been very clear in saying that Europe will have to take care of its own defenses now. 80 years after World War II finished, it's time. They're grown up. They're big boys now. And why should America have its skirt and have them on its skirt? So coming back to the Biden administration premises, I think that is shown to be outgrown. And here in the in South America, in the Southern Caribbean, I think that Mr. Maduro will be dealt with much more condignly. For example, Mr. Biden relaxed the sanctions on the processing of the oil and the shipping of oil by Chevron. It renewed the license. So Chevron, as a matter of fact, has been shipping over 224,000 barrels of oil to America. That is about more than a quarter of Venezuelan production. And that is hard currency that was supporting Maduro, that still kept on flaunting his actions in America's face. So all of that, Biden's softness, so to speak, has now been reversed. Mr. Trump has already canceled that license to Chevron, and it will now expire on May 27th. Incidentally, on May 25th, Maduro will be having another fling at his extremism vis-a-vis us, because he has declared he will be conducting an election for a governor of Essequibo, which he has purported to have annexed through his own legislature. So America's cancellation of that, and it's taking effect on the 27th, will be an important event where one quarter or more of his oil supply will again be truncated, and therefore we'll see how he'll be able to finance his excesses.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the two areas that we plan to discuss this evening. One is poverty, the other is joblessness or the unemployment situation. Now, the World Bank came out with a report in 2019 saying that the poverty rate in Guyana was 47%. That was based on a calculation of $5.50 US per individual per household. If you earn below that, you're in the poverty line. If you earn above that, you're above the poverty line. That was the standard they used to define that. Now, but since Guyana has been defined now as a high income country, they have revised that standard. They bring it upwards to $6.86 US per individual. So let's assume I've checked the data, and the average on the household, according to the 2012 census, was 3.7 person per household. I don't know what the current census will show, whether it's the same, whether it's decreased or increased. But assuming that you have 4 persons per household, it means that for the household to be above the poverty line, with the 686 threshold, you had to earn something like 172,000 Ghana dollars per month. If you're a household of five, you have to earn something like $216,000 per household. Now, if you have two people working in the household, I can see they can be above the poverty line, given the I think the minimum wage in the public sector is about 100,000, but most people get above that anyhow. But it seems to me where the poverty will reside will be mostly in the single worker household when only one person is working. But that is something which you can discuss. And um, now there were some studies done before in 1999, and but studies on poverty in Ghana was very rare. The last one was done, I believe, in 2009 or something like that. And they use a different, but they come up with a figure of 25% poverty, etc. But the World Bank one in 2019 is regarded as more recent and authentic. So if you can go ahead and comment what you think about the poverty level, you think it's still at 47%, or is it 5% now, 10%, or what? I mean, no study have done, but with all the development taking place and all the job creation, over 14,000 part-time jobs and so many jobs in the oil and construction sectors, the road, everything. So let's hear your views on that.
Well, Tara, I know you're a man with a great facility for numbers. Dr. Ganga, who is there, who has joined us, is also a man. You fellows with your PhDs and with your regression studies and all the other mathematical models you use. It's fantastic, and we have to use them. But I would like to start off from a different angle in terms of poverty from a subjective level because it's important. I live in Guyana. I returned after quitting my job in the United States as a corporate officer, and I've been back since 1988. And I've lived through all of this, all of those various studies and household income studies and all the different programs to alleviate poverty and what have you. I've literally lived through them, and in many cases was in Parliament when they were initiated. So I refer to this subjective aspect for a very, very important reason. It's called, and I'm sure both of you would know of it, it's called the attribution theory of poverty. That when we talk about poverty among people or within groups, it is very important to delineate how do these people attribute the source of their poverty, the causes of their poverty. So that because this will be very important in terms of what they do about it, because we are looking only from what the government is doing about it, and there's nothing wrong about that. But it takes two to tango, especially in the economic arena, because we're dealing ultimately with people, and people are actuated by what's in their head. So, in this attribution theory of poverty, different people attribute the cause of poverty. Some attribute it to what is called to individual causes. That it's the individual who must look around him and identify what is holding him back, and then he would act upon that. There's some who look at what is called the micro-environmental one, a little wider. The family, is the family broken? Are we not cooperating with the family within, the group or primary social group? And that might be why we are not moving ahead. But then you move to those who look from a structural societal point of view. And in that sense, they then look outside to a wider system as to what they call systemic factors. And this has been part of what the United States, they are reacting against, this wokeness, to remove the individual from any kind of agency for their situation and to throw it onto societal problems. Now, of course, there's always societal factors involved, but what about the individual one? And lastly, of course, there's always some fatalists who will say, this is bad times. This is the time when, we'll all be dying and all that. Anyhow, but I think in Guyana right now, you have a distinction in the two ethnic communities between individual causes and taking individual responsibility. And in another community, you're talking a stress on structural societal factors which have kept you down. And I speak specifically to those who will come back to slavery and to come back to all of what happened before to quote unquote explain present day poverty and only look towards removing those quote unquote obstacles, and then we will reach the promised lands. Hallelujah. It's not going to work. It has never worked anywhere. We got to come back to the individual. And that is where, coming back, let's talk very frankly. I will talk about my own circumstance. I'm living in the house where my father came out of the lodges of IFLUT in 1953, and we were as poor by objective factors that you would talk about, Tara. We were dirt poor. $26 a week to mind, as we say, 10 children, right? But we never felt we were poor. I never ever thought that this word poverty and all that. We were all expected to go to school, qualify yourself, work hard. So we had the back garden. We had fowl, as we call it. We had turkeys. We had duck. We had a little 2-acre farm. We'd all go. Then later we had a rice bed. And you take individual responsibility for your circumstance. And by God's grace today, all 10 of those individuals are successful, ranging from a vice president of JP Morgan Chase to engineers with the city and all that. And while those are some of many are still waiting for the societal constraints to be removed. So I come back to your question, Taraji, but I want to say this is very important. In today's Guyana, I sit here and every single day there's a group of people over social media who are only blaming the government, blaming the system, blaming everything, but not taking responsibility for their own situation. So I come back to your question. Should I stop or should I go on, Tara?
Yeah, let me just clear. Now, there's some people who have been trapped in what is known as a culture of poverty. So they're both physically and conceptually trapped. Those are people who need structural intervention, like government job programs, etc., to get them out of poverty. There are others who are not trapped in that, like you just mentioned, your example, individual responsibility, etc. But increasingly, governments have been taking on the role, have been intruding or intervening in the family affair. More and more functions of the family are being taken over by the government, like in cases of abuse of children, domestic violence, etc. They are playing a greater role. So people expect government to do more for them at the individual level. And this impinges upon the whole idea of individual initiative, etc. But let me just go you can comment on that later. But let me just go over to Dr. Ganga to, I mean, you are really describing the reasons why there could be variation among different groups in poverty levels,
That's right.
etc.
That's right.
But let me see what Dr. Ganga will say on this. Dr. Ganga?
Yes, here, welcome, Mr. Ravi Dev. Nice to see you again. The road has two sides. I remember that. Um, so I tend to follow your line of tackling the subject of both employment and unemployment. I think you're moving in the direction of employment, which is a direct uh, approach, rather than go with definitions and uh, and statistics about unemployment, which we don't have good stats and publishable data, and we rely on the coattails of the IMF and World Bank reports. They go in, they get the first pick, they agree on the consistency of these numbers, and then we follow up. But I don't like that either. So I will go a little more direct like you, and I will take up the matter of employment rather than unemployment, which is a little more problematic. So in terms of employment, um, we have what was alluded to by Dr. Tara, structural shifts. I think you hinted at that too. So it is important that we look at employment directly in terms of sectors, both the public sectors and the private sector. So what we have observed in terms of government expenditures is there's a boom in construction. So the construction industry has grown substantially based on visible, anecdotal, and other first-hand testimonies from the private sector. So we are observing now, starting with the layoffs in the sugar industry. So there was, let's say, there was labor surplus there. Then the construction boom came, and people would shift from sugar to construction, road construction, all different types of construction. They would also ship from rice and I believe bauxite to some degree. And then you have the Amerindian population. I don't know how to slice and dice them, but I'll say our Amerindian communities, they release people into the other sectors, in fact, into construction. Um, so the question is, how do you see this shift, this structural shift affecting our employment situation from your perspective? I'm glad that you mentioned the evolution from the colonial days or ancestors and the pipeline approach, which is that you go and find a job. So you either get work in your family farms or self-employed with some basic skills. So we're looking at employment. We're looking at structural variables and structural approaches first to tackle the employment to see that everybody is employed, and then residually you'll have the unemployment. So how do you see Guyana's dynamics in terms of structural shifts given
Well,
the growths?
it is um, not possible to ignore this shift if you move around the country. So, if you just step out of my home into the street, every street in this village of Ocean View has been rebuilt, and when they rebuilt, the jobs were given to local contractors. Ocean View, where I live in Iflat, has four streets. Right now, they're doing what we call the second street. And these are local individuals who are now doing these jobs. And that has been replicated in all of the infrastructural work that has been done by the government, there is a priority on giving work and giving jobs to locals. And that is across the country. And I think that as a beginning, they should be credit for that because, unlike what many are saying, never mind that we suddenly got this windfall out of oil, that poverty and unemployment will be wiped out immediately. That is impossible. There will be a lag. So we have to look at the direction in which we are going. And the direction in no way, shape, or form. And I'm not a member of the PPP. I never was, and I'm not. And I'm saying this in every way, shape, or form. You are having more people who are employed and who are bringing home a paycheck and who are doing that. And not only in what the government is doing. There's a family in the back street, and one of the things of all an idiosyncrasy of our back streets in all our villages, at least in my experience, is that somehow, I've never done it sociologically, but somehow they are a little bit behind the rest of the village back street. They always drink more, they carry on more, and what have you. So we talk of the back street people. And there's one family just right behind me. They were seen as very, very poor. But right now, they have put together their money, a mother, because there's no father, with her four sons who are in their mid 20s and what have you. And they have combined to have a fishing boat with an engine, and they go out. Each of them have their own seine. They bring in their catch, and the mother purchases the catch from them, dries the shrimp, and cleans the fish and sells that. So the boys have their business in selling, as fishermen, they're selling their catch. The mother has a job in terms of now adding value, to use the term you economists use. And she's making a very, very good level. And they have fixed their house up. As I look through my back window, right at the corner of that side toward the seawall, I can see their house has now been expanded. It's now painted. There's a new fence and all of that. And that is a mere, one example of what I see happening throughout the coast where I traverse, more or less. So there is definitely an uptick in employment. Well, let's take the same sugar industry that the PNC fired 7,000 people. Incidentally, I want to make this fact known. The PNC keeps coming back as if it's a rebuttal to say it's not 7,000 jobs, and they go to the Gaisuko pay list and say no, it's like 4,800 people who were fired, as if 4,800 is insignificant. But the problem is the difference between 4,800 and 7,000 that we've been using is that they pretend as if there's no private farmers who were affected. And right in our Wales area, where Tara comes from, that side of West Bank, that was the largest set of private farmers, incidentally, African private cane farmers who had to shut up shop because they couldn't send their cane to IFLT. It didn't make economic sense. So to come back to it, those factories were closing, but IFLT sugar factory is still grinding, as we say. And as with all of the sugar industry, they're having problems getting individuals to go into the field. But you're not getting people to go for those jobs. And this is where we have to be honest. We have to be honest. IFLT, for example, is a mixed village. But going into the sugar industry is not an option for Afro-Guyanese. And that is how it is turned out. So coming back to when we talk about unemployment, and we measure that by those who are not, who are looking for work. And those who are not looking for work are not counted. You can't tell me, and that's what the modern economists, they tell you. And so there was a big uproar when the private sector says that, that these people are not looking for work. There's a heck of a lot of people in Guyana that are not looking for work, and the work is out there. What is wrong with work in the sugar industry? You get money. The money it might not be, of course, You're not working in an air-conditioned office like the public servants, but it's work. And it's work that should be honored, that you have a chance to make your own living and to stand on your own 2 feet. So to come back to the question, I must say is that in my estimation, as you go across Guyana, there are some areas that are not. So, for example, in Berbice, there is less economic activity in Berbice at this point. And so therefore the opportunities may not be as great in Berbice. So from a regional standpoint, you will have some regional variations, but by and large, there is an uptick, and I think the government has to continue in this program, as Adam Brayton, for example, in his 2025 budget, where Berbice will be getting some new economic um, institutions.
Well, the the labor shortage in many areas is still striking. I spoke to one of the largest businesses in Guyana, the owner, and he says he has a vacancy of 100 in all categories, from engineers to unskilled labor, and he's finding difficulty to fill the 100. What he has had to do in the past was to import some skilled labor who will work on the dredge from India. And I know that I met another businessman who says that he's applied for permission to bring some labor from India to work. He's not yet getting Guyanese. He said he had a few Guyanese working with him. They worked 2, 3 days, then they disappeared, they're gone. And so that is correct. There are many people who sit, they don't want to work. I don't know where they get the income from. Um, but I guess this 100,000 handout and another 100,000 um, will help them. But I do not believe in handout. If you give handout, it must be targeted. It must be conditional. You give handout to improve your education, home improvement, buy a piece of land, etc. That's the type of handout I always favor. I don't like unconditional handout that I understand the government do that to relieve costs of living that you regard as targeted, etc. But you can't do it. That will develop a dependency syndrome, and that will kill the initiative of many people who do not like to work to come out and work. So I that's one thing. The other point about you talk about scarce labor in the the CEO of Gaisuku said they have mechanized over 40% of the operations in some estates. I don't know whether that was done in Wales, in Iflot, but when I was at Iflot last week, I saw several punts loaded with cane moving to the factory. Um, and But I can't say whether they're using mechanization in the field to reap the cane or even to till the soil. But that is the way I think that they're hoping to take us up to 60 to 80% mechanization and using different breeds of cane. And they have some technical assistance from, I think, Guatemala and from India to help them. Now, Ravi, gee, I know you're more versatile in that area, but that is what I was told, and this is what I witnessed myself when I was in Guyana. But the question is that the Minister of Labor, for example, told me that he believes that the unemployment level in Guyana is less than 5%. It used to be, the last thing they did was 11.7%. That was in 2007. But a recent report I saw something like 14%. But now he estimated to be less than 5%. Because he said everywhere they have the Central Manpower and Recruitment Agency at the Ministry of Labor, where they work with the private sector to when people apply, they can target specific industries where they're needed. Um, so that system seemed to be working well. Um, Now, talking about the two are definitely linked. Yes, the employment and the poverty level. Now, I think that the World Bank used the figure of 686 based on a basket of goods commonly used by household. I mean, there are other measures of poverty that other people have used, but this is the most common and more easy to use. The currency of 686 per individual per household. So I think no matter what, how we describe this thing, we got to come up with some quantitative judgment. That is the only way. That is not both qualitative and quantitative judgment is necessary to evaluate progress in any area. Uh, they work in symbiotic relationship. Now, the question is, there has been a report, I don't know if you saw it, where Guyana will need about 80,000 areas in special skills area. And the talk now is to, most of these people might have to be imported. If that is the case, there may be a need to review the immigration laws of Guyana. Now, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when oil was about to be struck, because I entered politics in 2000, went in the election there, and even though oil was not struck till 2015, if you look back at our program, we didn't call it a manifesto for obvious reasons. We don't want to seem to be read. We talked about oil back in 2000. And why? Because the US Geographical Department had conducted aerial surveys, which way back in 1999 had shown that there were vast deposits of oil off our coast. So even from back then, we talked about uh, and when oil was struck, we talked about, repeated it, that there should be a basal study as to what would be the needs of this new economy. Because finding oil in the 2000 is nothing new. It's been done across the world. And what were the needs of these countries? And in fact, there are companies that do this as a job. They will conduct a survey in the various components of your economy and tell you what are the needs. The APNU AFC coalition did nothing of that sort. They did nothing, even though oil was discovered on their watch, and they had 5 years to let us get going on it. So, what we are doing right now, Dr. Tara, is playing catch up. We have to play catch up, and but the thing is because we are caught between the constraints of oil as as a fossil fuel, wanting it to be phased out, and getting on to renewables. So we're being forced to monetize our assets ASAP. And I agree with the government. You take it when you get it, and then you use it for what is needed. But because we have to pump up as much oil as we can, playing catch up has become very, very difficult. So we lost 5 full years when, for example, auditors. We could be training auditors. Because we knew you had to audit Exxon books and all these people book. A simple matter like that, we were caught with our pants down. Much less in the technical areas that you would do. All of us knew you had to be injecting mud into the fields, oil fields, to bring up oil and on those things. But the point is, it was not done in a conscious manner. So yes, we're having to play catch up. So in the near term, we are going to have to import laborers if we are to use of our funds in the NRF, because we just can't spend it willy nilly. It has to be spent, and here I come back to it, into employment creating areas, because it's a virtuous circle. You spend the money that's coming in there, but you spend it, and infrastructure is one of those things. If you don't have roads to get to Hububak Dam, where we now have shade houses. Hubu, as you know, is all the way down, East Manchester. If you go down the old Hububak Dam road, which I did the other day, there are shade houses that are producing vegetables for the Caribbean market right along into Parika, and you can now go to the back of Parika and bring out your produce. But if you couldn't bring out those produce very quickly, and get them flash frozen and get them ready for the market, which Dr. President Irfan negotiated this 25 by 25 for us to reduce our food bill. And part of that is to ship our produce to the Caribbean. You will not be exploited. So coming back to what I'm saying, yes, you will have to import labor, skilled labor, and sadly, even unskilled labor. Both my kids, for example, are young professionals. One is a lawyer, one is a doctor, as you know. So they got young professional homes over in East Coast. So when I went with them to look at their homes, all of the laborers who are working 3 shifts around the clock to finish these homes, almost all of them are Venezuelans. Are Venezuelans. They are willing to work, and they are willing to work hard, and they're willing to give what it takes. So it's not only in the skilled area, in the unskilled area. But to come back to your point, yes, there is that need. We're going to have to, and I think 80,000 is a conservative number, because this is something that it piggybacks upon itself. The more you do, the more is created, and the more you happen. So, for example, when right now we have a certain amount of labor that is needed for the gas to shore plant up in Wales. But when that gets going, and you start to produce gas, and you start to produce liquids, or natural gas liquids, and you start to produce urea and all that, that's more and more labor that's going to be needed. That the people in Wales, even though they had a whole factory closed down and about 2,000 people lost their job, there'll be more jobs than that is needed. So yes, so this is where the government will have to again work, because the PNC didn't do it, to have a strategy for bringing in this labor. But as you know, bringing in labor into Guyana, that becomes a tendentious issue, because as we are hearing right now, this minute, that the PPP is bringing in these Venezuelans and registering them. But if the Venezuelans come in and they're working, and their parents were Guyanese, and they're able to get Guyanese citizenship, Guyanese birth certificates, why shouldn't they be registered? Why is there this big hue and cry? And these new people, the Cubans, for example, this is where Rubio was showing the figures. My daughter works in the public hospital. All the Cuban doctors and nurses into Guyana, they work at not only the same salary as the Guyanese, even better, because they are given housing. Look at that. Not only do they get as much money as my daughter, who is a chief resident, they get a housing allowance. The government prepares, because you want to attract them, just like you have to attract business by having tax concessions. To attract these Cuban, you have to attract them here. And they are becoming Guyanese citizens. And Rubio was shown that. That's why Rubio had to backtrack, even though he's the biggest hardliner on this whole Cuban. Maybe other people are exploiting Cuban labor. The salaries of these doctors, like all the other doctors, they go into an account in their bank, and they spend it, and they become. So to come back to it, yes, I'm confirming 3 things in terms of filling the labor gap. One, the government is going to have to have a structured program to be able to bring in these individuals, work with the private sector to bring in these people, house them. And if they want to become Guyanese, so be it. My concern, President of it publicly, we can't have Venezuelans coming in willy-nilly across our border. we must take it as a gospel fact that Maduro will be sending agents, fifth columnists, who will want to end up in region one and two in Essequibo, and they
Mm,
will then call themselves at some
mm,
point Venezuelans. We got to be careful. So it
mm,
has to. This program has to be run by the government.
yeah. Right. Thank you. Talking about the professional homes has to be done by Venezuelans. Right near to you, Dr. Satish Prakash, when he built that Gurukul 2.2 million US structure, all the laborers working there were Venezuelans as well, because he tried first with Guyanese labor and they've just worked 1 or 2 days and they left, so he had to complete. And I was there, I saw them working. Now, Dr. Ganga,
Well,
the
right now,
Yes.
rest.
Tara, the mandir in the front, the Sanatan mandir, because Satish was our Samaj, the Sanatan mandir is being rebuilt completely now, and it's all Venezuelans doing the job.
Okay. Dr.
Well,
Ganga, you're
yeah, well, this is the worrisome thing. It's very worrisome that the original Guyanese will be replaced. There's a population replacement set of forces happening in Guyana, and it's very worrisome. How do we tackle it? And you mentioned that about unskilled people are important. Our population characteristic came from farming background. No matter they go to the rum shop and whatever after that, but they came from a farming background, and we have to recognize that that's the starting point to train them. We train them as farming people, and what you need for farming, you need land. So the land policy has to be in favor of the Guyanese, original Guyanese population, not in terms of what's going to happen, that the replacement people will get the land. When you build a road, you have land on both sides. How is that being distributed? How is that being configured so that you have market to farms and you have population centers? As you mentioned, we need to plan it. We need to do it in a structured way. So, in order to overcome this population replacement and to put some of the dice loaded in favor of Guyanese, the original Guyanese, the ex-plantation worker and so on, or forefathers, we need to give them and empower them with land. Now, your example was very good with the fishing example. I like that because that shows that we need both opportunities and real resources in order to help people. So, what are these resources? Land. If we came from a farming background, you need to give them land. When Jagan did Blackbush Polder, I reminded him. I said the Canadian optimum was 15 acres. He said, that makes sense because he gave 2 acres for homestead and 10 acres for farming. What are we doing now? We're just giving out servant quarters with the house lots because they go travel from the small house lot and plots and then go work in the gated communities. We need to reverse that or at least go parallel. Let's be fair and let's have some equity in the distribution of the land so that those who want to become farmers, they have the resources and they can see the opportunities. I think we can see the people from the estates. They are really very smart. My father and your father, they knew what to do with opportunities. We ended up from Covent Garden. We had 3 trucks and we built the Mahika, Maikoni roads. I worked on those roads and we had the Linden Highway. I worked on that from teaching. I really liked working as a porter on the truck. So we have people in Guyana with the farming background and the mindset. We have to cater to those characteristics and mobilize them so that they can be self-employed. We have to empower them as owners so they can hire the Venezuelans. Not the Venezuelans will hire the Guyanese. We have to start now with a structured plan and have empowerment empowerment resources, and land is the most powerful one. What happened? It amazes me. We closed down all the sugar estates. What happened to the land? It went to the politicians. 2,000 acres there and 2,000 acres there. What about the workers and their families? Give them 5 acres, no mule. I rode a mule. Give them 5 acres, and they will know what to do with it. Like you give resources, they built a fishing boat. Oh, that's a beautiful thing. Building fishing boats, building boats with kabakali. That's a fantastic thing. Even building the boats is an industry by itself. Building the nets and all of that. These are the farming people, the population characteristics. We have to meet them. We can't just assume that you'd put an ad in the paper and you're going to get, yes, sir, I want that job and so forth. We have to go community by community, region by region, and evaluate the. You start with the unskilled. Not everybody will be working in the oil industry, as you observe that. So we start to get the other skills mobilized, starting with the unskilled. I wouldn't say they're unemployed. They're just waiting for something. They're waiting. They're hopeful. They have a mindset to work, but we have to mobilize that. So the population perception has to change in terms of being laborer to being owners, and to being the type of person who would move as a self-employed person, as a leader, and eventually they can be mobilized in other areas. But we have to get the mindset and the perception of the population, the people, that yes, they can do it. Stop thinking like like an employed laborer going to the cane field and coming back home and stop by the rum shop. We have to empower them with real land and responsibilities. Then we
All
will.
right.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Gang.
No comments on that.
Let me just make a quick comment. The government has regularized, have given title to thousands of landowners. They never had that. The PNC never did it. And Anil Nandalal is one of the leaders in this. Secondly, many of the people who get house lots, they are not interested in farming. A substantial number of them, they have government jobs, they work in construction or other industries. A very small amount of them are interested in farming. The government has just announced in Skelton Estate, thousands of acres will be given out to people who are interested in farming. And Region 6 and Region 9 has been designated as areas for industrial hemp cultivation. So the government is doing a lot in those areas. And one of the big question you raised, and probably I think I heard Mr. Dave raised too, is we are having this massive transformation, physical transformation. We also need a transformation in attitudes. And our attitudes is still in the past. We got to enhance this attitude and make it consistent with the development trust of the country. We cannot have physical transformation without attitudinal transformation. Mr. Dave, over to you.
Well, both you and Dr. Ganga are making the same point, and I want to develop it, which is that there has to be an attitudinal change in terms of, quote unquote, to use the phrase the young people say, in getting with the program that the government has. And I come back from where I started, this whole attribution theory of poverty. What are they attributing it to? So we can't pretend that there has, let's take our age group, me, you, and Dr. Ganga. We're all in our late 60s or early 70s. And that generation has passed. And this whole blaming of the system has percolated into individuals who used to take individual responsibility.
Mm.
It has percolated, and we have to recognize that. And as a matter of fact, that is part of, we have to take personal responsibility. Who does it? And that's where I like to ground what Dr. Gang said and what you said. Yes, it has to be done, but who does it?
Mm.
And this is where I have a problem with government getting into at such a granular level in our social relations, because we have seen throughout history, when you allow government to get that close to what motivates you, you have the beginning of totalitarianism. I am very suspect. So I believe that is what we're engaged, some of us in Guyana, to go to the grassroots and to or try to reorient these young people in looking at what they see as challenges, but as opportunities. So, take for example, I went to Leg One. In Leg One, I have a cousin. Uh, his grandson has a first degree. His wife has a first degree. They both work. One works at the post office, the wife. And he, to my great surprise and delight, is a farmer. And all he told me, he says, Nana, what I would like you to assist me in is to get what I see you all have on West Coast, these shade houses. He wants to expand into poultry. So you still have some individuals who
Mm.
will take these opportunities. And I must say, the government has been going into these communities and giving out land, giving out a certain seed money to start, for example, with poultry farming,
Mm.
to start with, as I said, in the Ruby Bagdam area, with new kinds of vegetables like shallot and like, what do you call it, broccoli.
Hydro, and you
And
got a
so
hydroponic.
hydroponic is one of the things
Yeah.
that is coming in. And the government has already introduced courses in that at our premier secondary schools
Yeah.
and in Nari. So
Mm.
to come back to the point is the who. So we need uh, NGOs, not just to be sitting in Georgetown and goateeing the same thing that the system got to change and the system this and the system that. Again, it comes back to that whole structural fetish that we have been taught over the last 50 years. And we got to get back to the individual. And this is why I'm very happy with some of the changes going on in America. Half of this wokeness, which is to blame everybody but yourself for your condition, got to go. And in Guyana, thank goodness. Take, for example, in terms of complaining that we in the countryside didn't have good education. Well, Swami Aksharananda, who I work very closely with over the last 20 odd years, founded this SVN as a school, and thousands and thousands of poor children from the countryside are doing as well as queens, as well as bishops, as well as the top schools, with individuals who did not get those top marks at the NGSA. These are individuals with just
Yeah.
300 rather than the 550 that
Yeah.
you get. So to come back to it, I think one of the suggestions I would like to make, and we are on this program, we have, hopefully we have individuals from the diaspora. This is a contribution that the diaspora can assist in, to come back and spend some time in Guyana, reorient our young people. In a sense, we have to be reminded as to who we are. And sometimes you might have to shake them a little, because I'm telling you, yes, in our villages, I live in Iflat Ocean View. Everybody came here because they were a sugar worker. And today, in my village, there's not a single sugar worker. Yet we are here with the lone surviving sugar estate in Demerara.
Mm.
So we'll have to reorient these young people in IFLET, and that's what we are trying
Yeah.
to do. To the opportunities are out there, and we need some more NGOs to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, there is much more that we can say, but the time is running out. One of the things I would have liked in the last couple of minutes we have is to talk about women in the labor force in Guyana. They have been grossly underrepresented, but under the PP administration, they have taken a bold step to train. As a matter of fact, some of the technical training programs being conducted by Board of Industrial Training, the majority of people benefiting are really women. So that's a great development. We need much more women in the labor force. The last ILO report suggests that less than 20% of the women were in the labor force, whereas over 80% was were men. So I think that is an area to help narrow the labor shortage, to get more of our women out in the market, and they're coming out. And I think somebody has suggested they constitute about over 35% of the labor force now. I don't know, but we are waiting to see what the new census, the 2022 census, will reveal. And anyhow, this has been a very productive discussion. The 1 hour is finished so fast, and I'll ask you to, Dr. Ganga, I'll ask you to make your final quick statement. Then we go on to Mr. Ravi Dev to make his final comment and closing remark. Dr.
Thank you.
Ganga.
Yeah, I think we have identified tracks both in the private sector, and one of those is the family oriented farms. Just like in the United States, you have small businesses. In Guyana, we have family farms and farm owners. In the public sector, we used to think of a teaching job or a civil service job on our way up. You get your, and then that motivated us to take advantage of UG. You go to UG, you stay in your teaching job, and then you launch into some other job. Many of us did that. And so the visible tracks should be there for both the private sector oriented and our ex-farm colleagues and families and so forth. And we need to then transform the civil service and the public sector into a more dynamic role. And the dynamic role is that they must be the training ground for managers. I think sometime in the past, the Foreign Service had that kind of arrangement. You go through the Foreign Service and then you become a leader somewhere. I have classmates who changed their names, you know, and they became big boys. But not all of us were so fortunate with that. So, visible tracks in both the private sector and the public sector should be there. Those are my closing remarks, because otherwise, we're going to have such a huge population replacement that we'd have to bring fast track languages, east, west, north, and south languages. I'm working on that. I taught myself Russian when I was 18 years old. I taught Spanish in the high school. It's not new, but we can't go that direction. Otherwise, we will be shooting ourselves in the foot by population replacement. I want a better term, but I'll just say population replacement, not displacement, not structural shifts, but replacement. Okay, those are
Okay.
my timing. Thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Tara. Thank
Mr.
you.
Dave, your
I'll just
closing
pick up
remarks.
your question on the female participation in the labor force. I think that's taken care of itself, Tara. When you look at all the training programs, invariably they're dominated by women. Our women, for over the last 4 decades, have been doing better than the boys. The boys are lagging in the schools in terms of their performance, and the girls are now that they're being given the opportunity by the government to enter even so-called male enclaves, they're doing well. And I think within the next few years, you will see a much more representative workforce gender-wise. But to come back to the other area, I just want to say this, that I would like to challenge the diaspora, that you have this cultural shift where a lot of our people don't see the opportunities in agriculture. And to use the economic term, we have a comparative advantage in agriculture. We may use hydroponics, but ultimately, agriculture is land and water. And we have both in Guyana, and that is where we have to get back our people to the land. So that is part of what the group that I have at this juncture. We do some of that, and I would like if you have individuals from abroad who want to come down and we can do some of this work. I would be glad to facilitate that to make this change for us to position ourselves for this new economy in this new century. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Ravi Dev and Dr. Ganga Ramdas. Thank you very much. We want to thank Dave Narayan from Dave Asian Imports for sponsoring this and previous programs. So until next time, we wish you a pleasant night and good night, Dr. Ganga. Good night, Ravi D.
Good night.
And good night to our viewers and listeners. Thank you.